Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So for today, obviously, I am talking about the NHL trade deadline. Once again, I've talked about it previously in other videos, so if you haven't checked them out, please do. I really appreciate it. But specifically today, I'm going to be talking about teams that are most likely out of all the others that could possibly not just be sellers at the trade deadline, but sellers in huge fashion, in fire sale fashion, if you will. And what I mean by this is that with teams having the possibility of trading at least 3 to 4 players come the deadline. Obviously, the teams I'll be talking about doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen, but it just seems likely, and I'll break down the reasoning for doing so. So starting off, probably the most obvious team is the New Jersey Devils. In 49 games played this year, they have 18 wins, 24 losses, 7 overtime losses. That's good for 43 points and is second to last in the Eastern Conference. The Devils have obviously had a terrible season. Nothing went right for them, but they have a lot of players on this roster that make perfect sense to get rid of if they find the right return. Obviously, they're going to be going, once again, for a top draft pick this year, and who knows what's going to happen. But if they do a fire sale, then the likelihood of that happening will only become more prominent. So, players start off. Kyle Palmieri. He has 1 year left on his contract at $4,680,000, and he has an 8-team no trade list. So obviously that limits where he will go, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he won't be traded. I'm sure Palmieri, being this stage in his career, even though he leads the Devils in points with 32, there is definitely a market for him as long as he seeks it. So don't be surprised to see him be moved by the deadline. He's just one of many. Then right behind him, I have PK Subban. Subban might be one of the most difficult for the Devils to move just because of his cap hit alone. He has 2 years left at $9 million a year. So that's huge. He only has 11 points this year. He has definitely regressed. There's no question. But to give him any benefit of the doubt is the fact that he is on this depleted and really not great looking overall Devils team. So yeah, Subban, if there is a market for him, then I'm confident the Devils will seek it because obviously they really have no reason to keep him. And the only thing that's holding them, in my mind, would be the cap hit. Sami Vatanen, next. He's a UFA at the end of the season. Probably the most eye-opening one out of all the Devils' options. He has a cap hit of $4,875,000, and he has 22 points on the season. Vatanen, I've always been a fan of, going back to when he was with the Ducks, and obviously when him and Henrique got traded, that really seemed almost like an odd move on the Devils' part, but it seems like looking back now, the Devils ultimately have won that trade, or at least close to, because Vatanen has always been solid for them. Vatanen is definitely a guy to look out come the deadline. I would fully expect him to get moved, especially to a contending team. It only makes sense. He is a perfect fit to have in a team's top 2 defensive lines and really help them not just on 5-on-5 but on special teams. And wrapping up the last 2 I have, and yes, that means I have a total of 5 that can possibly be moved. My guess is probably be around 2 or 3, but this is just a possibility. Wayne Simmonds is another that makes perfect sense to be moved. He's a UFA as well, has a cap hit of $5 million, and has 19 points on the season. Simmonds is perfect for a bottom 6 spot in any contending team, especially looking for some more grit in their lineup. So as long as the team can afford him, then that definitely seems like it is a sure possibility with Simmonds being moved. And the last of the Devils I have is their captain, Andy Green. Andy Green is a little tricky just because he does have a no trade clause. Now, I don't know if he's willing to modify it because I don't believe it's modified already. At least that's not what I saw on Cap Friendly. But Green, if he is willing to be moved, then I think that is definitely another possibility. He's a UFA at the end of the year and has a cap hit of $5 million. And another shutdown defenseman who, in my mind, would be a perfect fit for a team like the Florida Panthers. I just talked about them in my previous video, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But especially teams that are lacking in defense and need more of a stay-at-home guy, Green fills that perfectly given the market. Obviously, Green is older and isn't great by any means, but he's a reliable stay-at-home defenseman that knows what it takes to win. So Green would conclude my Devils picks, and he has 9 points on the season. So that's the Devils. Now the next team I have that could possibly do a fire sale. This one will obviously dictate more closer to the deadline, but I still think that there's a strong chance, and that is the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, the Blackhawks in 51 games played this year have 24 wins, 21 losses, and 6 overtime losses. That's good for 54 points, and they're only 3 points out of the second wildcard spot in the Western Conference. So, Blackhawks are still very much in it to make a playoff push, but the reality is, and they remind me kind of the Rangers a bit, and I will get to them, just because they're close doesn't mean that it's advisable for them not to sell at the deadline. They have guys that they can sell and get good assets. This Blackhawks team is really retooling, keeping certain veterans, but getting rid of others, especially that are expiring contracts soon. And yeah, I think it's in the best interest for the Blackhawks to really sell and sell big at the deadline. Because if we're being realistic, if they make playoffs by somehow and they keep their guys, they're not going to have a deep run. I just do not see it happening. That defense is too suspect, and their offense isn't good enough to really get it done on a nightly basis. As dynamic as they have been, the consistency, especially in their bottom six, has not been there. So for the Blackhawks, I have Robin Lehner and Corey Crawford. Doesn't mean that both will get moved. Doesn't mean that one will get moved. But one of the two definitely seems likely. They're both UFAs at the end of the season. Lehner has a cap hit of $5 million and Crawford has a cap hit of $6 million. Lehner has, without question, been the better goaltender between the two this season, and he's deserving of a pay raise come the end of the season. And I know that he wants to stay with the Blackhawks, but he also said that he is not going to take a pay cut. He feels that he's been doing that throughout his whole career and that he deserves what the going rate is for him, and rightfully so. Lehner has 15 wins and has a goals allowed average of 2.86 and a save percentage of 922. So fantastic stats, especially for a guy that is in his contract year. And Crawford has 9 wins, goals allowed average of 2.96 and a save percentage of 910. So Crawford is way past his prime, has been injury plagued for years now, but it doesn't mean that there aren't teams interested, especially a team looking for some type of significant backup that will not be a liability for them by any means. So expect at least one of the two goaltenders to be moved by the deadline, but don't be totally surprised if both of them are. And to continue, Eric Gustafsson, the defenseman, is a UFA at the end of the season. He has a cap hit of only $1.2 million, so that is a very great move that the Blackhawks could make. If they sell him, they could really get a strong return. He's only 27 years old. He has 24 points on the season as a defenseman. Obviously not a guy that you really would expect in the Blackhawks future, but especially for right now and what the going rate would be for a defenseman like him, you have to jump on that, in my opinion. If I'm Stan Bowman, that would be the first thing that I would do. But like I said, that's just my opinion. But Gustafsson, don't be surprised to see him moved either, because I know a lot of contending teams would be very interested. And to conclude the Blackhawks, I have Brandon Saad. He has 1 year left on his contract with a cap hit of $6 million and has 21 points on the season. So Saad, another guy who would be perfect in your top 6, top 9 for a contending team that is looking for more scoring depth, a reliable scorer who, granted, has not played great with the Blackhawks, but could thrive under a different system. He's still relatively young, so it wouldn't be a terrible move by any means if they got rid of him, especially at this point in his career. So yeah, those are the Blackhawks that I fully expect to, if not guaranteed to be moved, then definitely possibly, especially if the Blackhawks are not in a playoff spot come the deadline. Like I said, I just don't see why they wouldn't sell big. It only makes sense for them, especially with how deep of a draft this 2020 draft is. Montreal Canadiens are next in 51 games played. They have 22 wins, 22 losses, 7 overtime losses, 51 points, and they have 10 points out of a playoff spot. I don't see Montreal making the playoffs, and I understand that they desperately want to be back in the playoffs and they want to make their fans happy, but in my opinion, it is best for them to do a fire sale as well, get rid of guys that they know that they can get strong return in, and really help retool, rebuild this Montreal team that already has one of the best prospect pools in the entire National Hockey League. So starting off, Ilya Kovalchuk, obviously they picked him up not too long ago. He's a UFA at the end of the season, only making $700K. So that is definitely something that I'm sure a lot of contending teams would be interested in. that will look for that depth scoring in their top nine. Kovalchuk has played very solid since starting with the Montreal Canadiens, and overall between time with the Canes and the Canadiens this year, he has 17 points, 7 goals, 10 assists in 26 games. So not bad by any means. You know what you're going to get with Kovalchuk. The goal scoring isn't there like what he used to be, but the passing is still superb. He is a defensive liability, but you're getting him obviously not for his defensive attributes by any means. So after him, I have Thomas Tatar. He's a more obvious one. He has 1 year left on his contract and has a cap hit of $4.8 million and has 44 points on the season. Tatar has been fantastic for the Canadiens, and he would definitely rack up a huge haul at the trade deadline. And if I'm Montreal, I'm jumping on that. You can easily get a massive haul, whether it be a combination of picks and prospects, top picks, might I add, or more NHL-ready players that are younger and have, say, a higher ceiling. So there are a lot of possibilities with Tatar, but if I'm Montreal, Marc Bergevin, I am jumping on that right away because the reality is they are most likely not going to make the playoffs, especially with how tight the Metro Division is. And the last but not least, I have Jeff Petrie. Jeff Petrie, I know a lot of Canadiens fans love. He has 1 year left on his contract at $5.5 million for the cap hit and has a modified no trade clause, no movement clause, and has 29 points on the season. So Petrie's another one that just makes a lot of sense to me to be moved, especially if they are going to sell at the deadline. Why not sell big? It just makes sense. Like I said, Montreal has a very strong prospect pool, and I'm sure that losing Petrie will not hurt them in the long run. Petrie is obviously not a part of their future in this rebuild, retool, whatever you consider they're doing. But I think that they need to commit to something and commit to it fast, and I don't see Petrie being with them going forward. So if I'm Montreal, I would definitely get rid of him. But those guys make a lot of sense to me to be moved, and that could definitely help Montreal's chances at either getting a top pick in this year's draft or just a cultivation of a lot of picks overall. And to conclude this video, obviously, Rangers fan, if you didn't know, the New York Rangers. The Rangers, as much as I don't want to see certain players go, it seems imminent that regardless of what they do come the trade deadline, they're most likely going to sell and sell big like they have in years prior. They're still in a retool, a rebuild, and they understand that the future isn't this year making playoffs. The future is still 3, 4, even 5 years away from being exactly where they want to be. It is still about developing. So Chris Kreider, unfortunately, as much as I am personally a huge fan of him ever since he got called up years ago, I don't see him staying with the Rangers unless he takes a pay cut. He's a UFA at the end of the season. The most coveted winger in this year's trade deadline has a cap hit of $4,625,000, and that's 32 points on the season. So Kreider most likely will be moved. And right behind him, I have guys like Alexander Georgiev with the goaltending logjam the Rangers have. Talked about it in previous videos, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. That's been my most loved video on this channel to date. Georgiev is an RFA at the end of the year. Young, stellar goaltender. I really love the guy, and only has a cap hit of $793,000. So talk about being cap friendly for any contending team, including the Toronto Maple Leafs. I would expect to see him moved as long as Lundqvist doesn't even consider being moved. If Lundqvist decides that I will waive my no trade clause now to go on a contending team, then obviously things would change, but I just don't see that happening. So Georgiev has 12 wins on the year, has a goals allowed average of 3.11, and has a save percentage of .910. So not fantastic, but he has been really solid on a Rangers team that has one of the worst defenses in the league. So overall, you can't go wrong with a young goaltender like him and the amount of control that you would have getting him with him being an RFA. And Jesper Fast, another guy I'm a big fan of. UFA at the end of the season, great overall winger, one of the most defensively responsible wingers you could get in the NHL. Will put anywhere in your lineup and he'll succeed. He has a cap hit of $1,850,000 and has 21 points on this season. He has been a huge benefactor with playing with the likes of Artemi Panarin and Ryan Strome this season. That line has been great for the Rangers. But Fast is a guy that is replaceable, and as much as I like him, I won't be surprised to see him moved either. And you could get a decent return for a guy like him for his all-around ability. So expect to see him move possibly as well. And to conclude this video, I could have won with other guys, but the one that seems really most likely to me, unless he takes either a bridge deal or a significant pay cut for what his market would be, is Ryan Strome. Ryan Strome has over 40 points on the season. Really came out of nowhere for the Rangers since they traded for him last season. And he's an RFA at the end of the year and has cap at $3 million and $100,000 and has 43 points. So Ryan Strome, if he were to be on the market, he would get a big haul. There is no question, especially the fact that he's an RFA. He's still relatively young. There's a lot to like about Strome's game. My only flaw that I really have with him is the amount of penalties that he takes. It drives me nuts. He does it on a pretty consistent basis whenever I watch the games. And yeah, that's really my biggest flaw with him. He is not a defensive liability, I would say. And he has been playing really strong with or without Panarin. He has shown that he is a capable top 6 or top 9 center in the NHL. So that is going to conclude my video. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know who you think might be sellers at the deadline and fire sale type sellers too. Obviously, this doesn't necessarily mean this will all happen, but this is a possibility. So let me know what you guys think. If you're a fan of any of these teams, let me know your input. If you agree or disagree with me, all that great stuff. If you haven't checked out previous videos, please do. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, all those great things. Thank you all so much once again, and I will be back in a day or two.